the street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun it shall never go down.
All right, Daniel 8, verses 1 and 2. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. Now, I'm going to stop there and just, he's setting forth time and place for where this happened. Important information. Anytime people are telling you a story, one of the ways that you know whether or not that story is reliable is if they can recount to you particular detail about such things. Where it happened, what was going on, what time frame it happened, where you're at, and some consistency in those details confirms that that the information is correct. Somebody might get picked up by the police, and they might offer an alibi by saying, well, I was at such and such a place. Well, if the rest of the evidence doesn't line up that that's where they were at that time, i.e. they got a cell phone ping another side of town, they're going to say, yeah, you weren't being truthful with me. So when you look at the evidence that's available, if the story lines up, those details are what let you know that you can have confidence in it. So we got a timing here. The vision's given to Daniel in the third year of King Belshazzar. That is a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. That's important because that tells us that this vision in chapter 8 is actually after the vision recorded in chapter 7, but before what was described back in chapter 5, because Babylon's fall was described in chapter 5, which tells us something else. Are we dealing with a book that is in strict chronological order? And the answer is no. I kind of classify this book the same way I classify Genesis and several other books, some of the Gospels. I call them pseudo-chronological. Generally speaking, the beginning of the book and the end of the book have a general arc of time, but not every detail is exactly placed in that arc in the exact place, because sometimes we're dealing with topical discussions, sometimes we're organizing the information for other reasons than for chronological reasons. This is one of those instances where this vision, regardless of when Daniel received it, is important to the storyline to be placed here. Or to look at it another way, the destruction of Babylon that was recorded in chapter 5 was part of the historical narrative. Now we're dealing with these other more symbolic things that reflect back into that historical narrative. And so that's what's going on here. Daniel sees himself in Susa. Some translations may say Shushan. That's the citadel in Elam beside the Ulai Canal. This is a region that's later associated with the Persian Empire. And so it puts us in place where all of these stories occurred. Now, as we look through the narrative, we had essentially three different kingdoms. I'll call them kingdoms. We had essentially three different kingdoms. Now, how could Daniel be a part of all three of those kingdoms, especially when you're talking about some of them being Babylonian, some of them being Persian and Mede, and some of them being... How does that work? Well, because it was all the same landmass. They were taking over and controlling that same area. Then there's a transition that is taking place here. The vision is narrowing in focus from chapter 7's broad view of world empires, which is what that vision was about. And now it's focusing in on the conflict between the Medes and the Persians and what followed that with Greece. And it's highlighting how human power rises and falls under divine decree. Okay, so God gave this general principle that there's going to be this kingdom followed by this kingdom followed by this kingdom. Now we're going to focus in on the development of two of those kingdoms, and that involves some internal development between the first one. That Medo-Persian period, there's a reason why we call it the Medo-Persian period. The Medes and the Persians were not the same people. There's a reason why it's ordered as the Medo-Persian period. The Persians rise to prominence in the latter half of the kingdom, and so they're gonna, that's going to be visually depicted in this vision. History is not random. Now, I've said before, we're free to make choices, right? And that never goes away. And that goes on in the world. That goes on with kings and with nations and all sorts of things. God is not micromanaging what happens. At the same time, it's not random. Randomness suggests what? That there's no order or purpose. That is not the picture of history that the Bible gives us. Even empires and armies and kings move in ways that accomplish God's purpose. And ironically, for instance, in Rome's case, even though their intent was to undermine the purpose of God, the very things they did to undermine the purpose of God facilitated its growth. And so sometimes their purposes can be directly contrary to the purpose and plan of God, and God still uses their actions to bring about what he desires to come to pass. And that is a significant thing to understand. Listen, Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, the Medes, but none of these people are saying, let's elevate the God of heaven and accomplish his purpose and get the kingdom into his people's hands. That's not what they're trying to accomplish. You know what they're all trying to accomplish? We know exactly what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to accomplish. The text covered that. What are they trying to accomplish? The preservation of their own power and authority, and the health and growth of their own empires. And we're being told here over and over and over again, and at some point maybe it's going to sink in, despite the fact that these nations are going to come and go, I'm at work and I'm doing something that's much greater than this, and that's more important, and that will last forever, while your work will not last forever. What was Nebuchadnezzar's actual given name? Does anybody know what his birth name was? Anybody know what city he was born in? Anybody know anything that he built? Why don't we know that stuff? He was a great man. I don't know that we have anyone alive on the earth today that rises to the level of Nebuchadnezzar in terms of power, influence, means, availability of the exercise of that power in remote places, accomplishing any more greater feats than he and his nation accomplished. About the only thing that you might have heard of at some point is the gardens of Babylon. You might have heard something about them if you are interested in history at all and you've read about the 8 wonders of the ancient world. Well, that was part of his work. But nobody knows anything about it. Nobody knows where they were or what they exactly look like to you. That is part of what James is talking about when he says your life is but a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. That's part of the lesson here about human ingenuity and human work and human organization and human government. It literally is temporary. We've got a giant monument to General George Washington. And most of us went through American schools that taught American history. And I dare say that most of us have just a vague idea of some of the great things that he did. And efforts have been made for us not to forget them. And they're still forgotten. We have to understand that what God is doing is not like that. And that's what he's explaining. His kingdom will endure forever. And then we find out later on, as Jesus is talking about it, at the very point of his death, well, you say that I'm a king, and you're right about that, but my kingdom is not like your kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world. In fact, my kingdom is in your midst. It's here now. And you can't say, look, there it is, or oh, there it is over there. There's not, you can't rally your armies against it and do battle and destroy it. By the way, the Roman government tried, and it just made it worse from their perspective. It made it spread and it made it grow. That is so important for us to understand and learn in the way that we look at the world and look at life and look at ourselves. So he goes on, I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal, and it had 2 horns. And both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward simultaneously. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. So this ram is just dominating, and nobody can do anything about it. Nobody can stop it. Nobody can resist it. He does what he wants to do. He goes where he wants to go. He controls what he wants to control. Got this nice, interesting nature about it, where there's 2 horns, and one of the horns is higher than the other horn, and it actually comes along last, and that's unique. And what's that mean? Well, skip down to verse 20. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. We're told who the ram is. And so let's talk about these things for a moment. The ram has 2 horns, one higher, the other higher one rising later. Both of these are great, but Persia arises to greater power behind Media. It pushes west, north, and south, and nothing can stand before it. There was no kingdom that was able to stop them from doing what they wanted. They wanted a territory, they just walked in and took it. And to borrow a line from the Borg, resistance is futile. The angel later identifies that we're talking about the kingdom of the Medo-Persians. We understand from history itself that Persia dominates later in this alliance over Media, and its conquests reflect the historical expansion under Cyrus and all of his successors. And by the way, it's a pretty big block of history, and it rewrote world history. And there are still things that are happening today that are connected to what went on then. That whole region of Turkey and Iraq, and that whole region is still in the news today. Much of their influence even has some lingering effect, though everyone has completely forgotten who, where, why, or how. he's talking about those things. But earthly strength and expansion only happen how? So why did the Medes and the Persians accomplish what they accomplished? Why was this ram able to go northward and southward and westward and nothing could stand it? Why was that possible? Because God allowed it. God's allowance is important. Go back to chapter 2 for a moment. I think verse 21. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. God rules in the affairs of men. So pride in our accomplishments and in our own power is misplaced. Nebuchadnezzar, taking pride in himself and in his nation, was misplaced, and God humbled him for it. The Medes and the Persians, believing that their success rested in the power of their armies and their brains and their knowledge, they were failing to acknowledge that all of that arose and was given to them by God. Who else does that apply to? Well, it applied to Rome. Let's not skip Greece. It applied to Greece. It applied to Rome. It applied to Great Britain. Who else does it apply to? It applies to us. Our politicians love to go on television and say we've got the most powerful army in the world and we can go and do what we want to do and no one can stop us. But you know what we've all forgotten? That it's by the providence of God that we have and are what we are. That it's by the allowance of God. And that just as surely as he allowed us to rise to prominence, he can at his will do what? Strip it up from us. And we have an entire history of evidence for that. We never should take pride in ourselves, in our accomplishments, in our power, in the force that we are in this world. And Daniel knew that. Joseph knew that before him. When Joseph interpreted dreams for the king, for the Pharaoh in Egypt, what did he say? God gives the interpretation to me. This is God's, not mine. Which is essentially what Daniel said, right? This is what God says about this. This is what God is telling you. Not me. That is also, fast forward to the apostles. We are the apostles of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is his word that we're telling you. This is his desire for you, not us. We're nothing. And even Jesus himself, while he was on the earth, said what? He was merely speaking the Father's will, doing the Father's will. That he had no authority within himself, that what authority he had was given to him. Now listen, if the creator of all things in the form of man can take that position about his own life, anybody in here think that you have the right to claim some kind of power or authority for yourself? If God in the flesh, God with us, didn't do that? And I think sometimes we read the story of Jesus, we miss that completely. We miss the fact that he over and over and over tells people, I do nothing on my own initiative. What I say, the Father has given me to say. What I do, the Father has given me to do. I have no authority except what was given to me by the Father. And the same record that records him saying those things over and over again points out to us that that individual who was saying those things was the creator of all things, spoke the world into existence, and that apart from him, nothing exists. And if he, in his human flesh, understood that it was God and not that physical presence, we ought to be able to pick up on that for ourselves as well. No matter how great we may seem, has nothing to do with us. Look at verses 5 through 8. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn. It's split in a weird place. Had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Wait a minute. This ram that we were just told could not be stopped and nothing could withstand it. Now this goat comes up and completely dominates the ram. What in the world is he talking about? Well, skip down to verses 21 and 22. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. Almost everybody universally says that is probably Alexander the Great. I don't know, but that's what they say. As for the horn that was broken, in the place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And so you've got this unified Greece with great power and influence that's replaced by fractured Greece. Not one of the other horns, leaders that arises in that fate. Still a powerful kingdom, but not any one of those horns is as great as the one that was replaced. Now, this is significant in some ways that I think sometimes we miss completely. We think that if that first horn is so great and the 4 that replaced it are lesser, why isn't that great horn still in power? Because it was never about his abilities. It was never about his wisdom. It was never about his leadership. It was never about how great a strategist he was. It was always about God allowing him to reign. Now, was he great? Absolutely. Did he have all of those abilities? Without doubt. But for every one world leader who is there and has those kind of abilities, there are thousands of people who have the exact same abilities who never rise to power. Why don't they rise to power? Because it's not within the will of God for it to be. And Joseph, who's sold as a slave and put in prison, God takes out of prison and makes in charge of a nation. Why? The youngest of 12 sons that's hated by his brothers and quite frankly, though he's loved by his father's kind of exasperated by him. Just be quiet and quit saying these things. Who do you think you are? What do you mean? You really think that your mother and I are going to bow down and worship you? So even the people who like him are frustrated with him. He's sold into slavery. He's put into prison. He's essentially sentenced to death. At least the people around him were sentenced to death, so I'm going to assume he was as well. And God says, no, I want him here. And through a series of events, God brings it about. Some visions that no one can answer except for him. And because he answers them, the path is open for him to rise to the position that he arose to. And what did that do? That let the entire family of the people of God move into a place where they could be preserved and kept until God was ready to use them 470 years later, or whatever it was. It had a whole lot less to do with Joseph and a whole lot more to do with God. Assuming this is Alexander the Great, it had a whole lot less to do with Alexander and a whole lot more to do with God. We have to understand those things. And so this notable horn between its eyes, not as important as the fact that God allowed the goat to come along and knock the ram over. Because if God didn't want for the goat to knock the ram over, it wouldn't have mattered how great the horn was. History confirms this prophecy with striking precision. The Medo-Persian Empire fell to Greece in 334 to 331 BC. Alexander's empire divided after his death among 4 generals. Earthly greatness, even at its height, is fleeting. God humbles the mighty. He divides their power as he wills. He takes it from who he wants to take it from. He gives it to who he wants to have it. Nebuchadnezzar learned that lesson. Alexander learned that lesson. Many other people have learned that lesson. And usually the taking it comes just after someone makes the prideful statement of, I'm untouchable. I can do whatever I want to do. And it's as though God says, oh, you really think so? Well, let me show you. But what he's really doing is showing all of us so that we learn and understand those. Anybody have any questions about these things so far? All right, next time, Lord willing, we'll look at the little horn that arises starting in verse 9, some blasphemous power. This one gets a little bit more controversial, I guess I'll use that language, as far as identifying what it's about. We'll talk about that to some extent, but the lesson's ultimately the same. And then we'll make application of the interpretation and Daniel's response to it at the end of the chapter. And I think we'll probably finish this chapter next Lord's Day morning. Appreciate everybody that's here and the comments that we've had, and those that are visiting with us. I appreciate your presence.
I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never dawn. Son